what would happen if I begin to ask the world, the universe, people, what would happen if I begin to ask for what I wanted?
Welcome to the Perpetual Motion podcast, where curiosity meets career excellence. I'm Dr. Mo Anderson, and I invite you to join me on a journey of personal growth. In each weekly episode, we dive into inspiring and often hilarious conversations with global experts. From communication mastery to wise investments, we've got you covered. My guest today is Fletcher Ellingson, and he's a very interesting man, as my big mama used to say. Fletcher is a speaker, coach, TV show host, professional magician. Even I stumbled over that one. Professional magician. You heard me right. And the author of The Practice of Feeling Good. I have a question for you, listeners. Do you have a fear of rejection? I do, and you probably do as well. Today, we delve into the concept of using fear effectively and understanding why fear exists. I cannot wait to hear more.
You can't say Dr. Mo ain't tell ya that fear magnifies the consequences of failure. What are you scared of? Why are you afraid?
Welcome, Fletcher.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. I've been looking forward to sitting down and visiting with you.
As have I. This topic, just when I heard what you do, what you talk about, I was like, I am all in. So many of us fear. And I'm anxious to learn how we can actually use that to our advantage. But let's start with the rejection experiment you conducted. What prompted you to do that? And what was the biggest thing you learned from it?
Oh, yeah, you bet. Good question. So I was watching a TEDx speaker, and this gentleman, his name just slipped my mind, but he wrote a book called Rejection Proof. And it was about him and his year of a rejection experiment. And I watched this and I was just like, oh my goodness, that scares the heck out of me, considering doing what he did. And then I heard my own voice. I was like, oh my gosh, you just have to do it then. And because I wanted to get over my fear of rejection. I didn't really think I had a big fear of it, but the more I got curious about it, I realized I'm not willing to ask just anything of anybody. And then I looked at that statement. I'm not willing to make requests of strangers or people who I don't know, or I don't want to put people out. And I was like, what's at the core of that? And so I decided I want to become a master asker. I want to be able to
asker.
That's right.
I love it.
Yeah. I want to be able to make requests of anybody without worrying they're going to judge me, if they're going to say no, if I'm going to look foolish or embarrass myself. So I set out to kind of replicate what this guy had done. And so it was my year of rejection experiments. And so there were just a few rules to this. One of them was, number one, the request I make has to be audacious and bold, and it has to scare me. Okay. So these are requests of complete strangers. And number two, I can't tell them why I'm making this request of them. Right. So I can't say, oh, hey, I'm Fletcher, I'm doing this rejection experiment. No, they have to be not in the know. And number three, I can't be doing it to impress anybody. I can't have a friend along and say, hey, watch this. I'm going to go do a rejection experiment. No. So, those are the three rules. And I set out, on my year of rejection. And I'm telling you, what I learned absolutely floored me and surprised me. And it was one of the most valuable lessons I've ever learned. And these experiments, do you want me to give you a couple examples of what I did?
Yes, definitely. That was going to be my next question for sure.
Okay. So for instance, and remember that the experiments had to make me nervous and make me fearful. And so, like, for instance, I was in line in a coffee shop, and I tapped the person in front of me on the shoulder, and they turned around, and I said, hi, hey, would you mind if I take cuts in front of you for no good reason? And, right. And she said exactly what almost everybody says when I make these requests. What? Right? That's just like, they're like, it's because it's like a pattern interrupt. They're not expecting this.
Right.
And I said, do you mind if I take cuts in front of you for no good reason? Now, the no good reason was the important part, right? It's not because I was in a hurry, not because there's an emergency. But it's just for no good reason. And, she's like, for no good reason. I was like, yeah. And she thought about it, and she's like, well, I guess so. So I take cuts. I said, thank you. And so now I'm standing in line.
I would appreciate the honesty. Really. I just feel like at least he was honest. He didn't lie and say something about his car or work or whatever.
Right.
He said for no good reason. Wow.
And then the surprising thing happened. So I'm standing in front of her now, and she says, hey, would you like to take cuts in front of my friend who was in front of me? And her friend wheels around very quickly, and she says, I don't think so.
Oops.
Right? Yeah. So two very different, and I didn't even ask her at that point, right?
But she overheard. Sure.
So two very different responses to this question. One was, well, sure, go ahead. And why don't you take cuts in front of my friend as well? And then the other was like, no, thank you. No way. So, and then I said, okay, no problem. Now, after I got my coffee and I was heading out the door, the one who was kind of put off by it, she said, hey, excuse me, could you come over here for a minute? And so she asked, like, why would you do that? Why would you ask to take cuts for no good reason? At that point, I explained what I was doing. And so it was this really cool conversation. She got to get curious about what was she reacting to, right? Because there's something there that upset her. Somebody had made a request, and her response was to get upset about it. So she got to get curious as to what was going on for her. And so it was a very fascinating conversation. Now so that seems easy, right? That seems like an easy thing to do. But when
it doesn't seem easy if I'm being
honest.
Especially the way people are right now. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, but now, no, that's pretty monumental to me because you just don't know how they'll react.
Right. And so another time I was in Southern California, and I got up early. I like to do early morning walks when I'm there. And I was walking down this neighborhood, and I knew I had to do a rejection experiment that day. And by the way, this was not easy for me. This caused me a lot of concern. It always made me nervous, right? It was on my mind. I wanted to do it, but it was like, it's still not easy. But anyways, I'm walking down the road, and I glance over to my left, and I see a house, and they have a garage, and the garage door is open, and I see a ping pong table in there. And as soon as I saw it, I knew and my mind, the chatter in my brain started. It was like, Fletcher, don't do it. Do not do this one. Pass on this one. Do something else. Don't do this. Now, when my mind starts saying that, I know that I have to do it because it was fearful, right? That was the fear talking.
Right.
And it was especially fearful because I was going to cross someone's private property line to make this happen.
Right.
So, I decided to do it, and I walk up their driveway, and I knock on the door, and I hear a dog barking and some muffled voices and some, people shuffling around, and someone comes to the door, and there's a woman that opens the door. She's like, hi, can I help you? And I said, yeah. I said, hey, my name's Fletcher. I'm from Washington State. I'm just up here visiting my in-laws. But I noticed on my walk this morning that you have a ping pong table in your garage. I was wondering if anybody wants to play a game of ping pong. And what did she say? The same thing everybody always says. Excuse me? What?
Did I hear you right?
Exactly, right? Because it's a pattern interrupt. They're not expecting this. So their mind, which is usually on autopilot, it didn't compute. So she's like, excuse me, what? So I go through my spiel again. I'm up from Washington, saw the ping pong table. Anybody want to play ping pong? And she said, you just want to play ping pong? I said, yeah. Do we know you? Nope. I live in Washington State. Just a second. She closes the door. I hear more muffled voices. A few seconds later, the husband opens the door.
Mm-hmm.
Can I help you? I go through my whole spiel again.
I would imagine he's with his deepest voice. Yeah.
Right. Because imagine the conversation. She's like, there's a stranger here who wants to play ping pong.
No, there's a weird stranger.
Exactly. Right. And so I go through my whole spiel and he has the same questions. Do we know you? No. You just want to play ping pong? Yes. Just a second. He shuts the door. I hear some more muffled voices. A few seconds later, their teenage son opens the door and says, hey, my parents say you're looking to play some ping pong. And I said, I am. Would you like to play? And he says, wow. You bet. And so we go out and he whoops me at a couple games of ping pong. And then I leave and I'm on my way.
Wow.
Yeah. Right. So
how did you feel after that? Yeah.
I felt exhilarated and relieved. Because it was over. Right. And I realized it didn't kill me. But I'll give you one last one because I want to show you what's possible when we begin to make these audacious requests or simply ask for what we want. Mm-hmm. My wife and I were on a plane and we were headed down to Mazatlan to stay at this resort. It was a very, very nice resort, like a 4 or 5 star resort. And on the plane, I'm like, well, I know I have to do some rejection experiments down there. So I came up with one. When I got off the plane, we got to the resort. They have all these people who who sell timeshares there. Mm-hmm. And I went and I wanted to find the manager, and I found the manager and introduced myself, and we chatted for a little bit. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to ask this guy if I can put on a mini seminar to all his agents. Now, he doesn't know me. I don't speak Spanish. He doesn't know anything about me. There'd be no reason for him to say yes. And by the way, the point of the rejection experiment is actually to get rejected. I want to be told no. Okay. That's the whole point of this experiment.
It's not to get to yes, is to get to no.
It's to get to know, right? Wow. So this should be so easy for me to get no. But as you can see in the ping pong experiment, they said yes, right? So I asked this guy, hey, Mario, would it be all right if, I came and did a mini seminar with your agents one morning? He said, absolutely. What are you doing Wednesday morning? I said, I guess I'm going to be here talking with your people. He said, yes, you are. He said, I'm going to make it required that all 50 of my people are here in attendance to listen to you.
Wow.
Yeah. So they all show up. We have a great time, by the way.
What did you talk about?
Mindset. I talked about, a lot of the stuff that's in my book. And we had just a great conversation with all 50 of his people. Later on during that day, I saw some of them, giving tours, and we'd high five as I passed them. And then he found out my wife is a family practicing physician. And he said, hey, do you think that your wife would be willing to come back in a couple days and talk to my people about creating health and vitality? And so we show up a second time on our vacation to make a presentation. And so all of this came from my intention to be told no. Now I got a whole bunch of them, right?
Right. Those are great examples though. And
what I learned was that people almost always said yes to these audacious requests.
Wow.
They said yes. And so, the takeaway for me, what would happen if I begin to ask the world, the universe, people, what would happen if I begin to ask for what I wanted?
Wow.
Yeah, wow. Right?
I love that. And it's so many of us can adopt that. And as you were sharing those examples, I'm a curious person, imaginative. I was an only child for 13 years, so I live in my head. And I have the thoughts, like you just said, I see the ping pong table. I see different, instances where I'd like to insert myself, but then I talk myself out of it because I guess because of the fear of rejection, or in Texas, the fear of being shot. However, which is where I live. And everybody has a gun, I'm being honest.
It's valid, right? It's a valid concern.
Yeah, it's a valid fear. But, there are other circumstances that are a little more safe. And I really just talk myself out of perhaps opportunities. So I love what you did and that you went through it for a year. Now, I have to ask one more question about those examples you gave before we move on with the conversation. And that is, I'm also in healthcare. And when I go on vacation, the last thing I want to do is a workshop for anybody. So I'm just curious how your wife felt about this invitation based on your own journey.
Yeah. I tell you, my wife is, she's a personal development junkie like me. And she's just like, she is up for it all. So I'm pretty fortunate.
Sounds like you guys are well matched. Matched. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And Mo, the other thing that I learned was that when people did reject me, they actually weren't rejecting me. They were simply rejecting my offer. And that is a big distinction.
Yes.
Right? Because we frequently think that, oh, they're rejecting me. No. They're simply rejecting the offer or the conversation or the idea that you have presented. That's very different. It's not personal.
It is very different. So from that, my question then becomes, how can fear be transformed from a barrier into a tool for personal growth?
I love this. Yes. Let's talk about it.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So first off, we want to understand what is actually at the core of fear. If we want to learn how to navigate fear more effectively, more powerfully, we first must understand what is at the core of every fear. And at the core of every single fear, without exception, is simply a story. That's it. And so if we understand that it's a story, we can begin to navigate it. We can begin to interact with it. We can begin to ask questions like, is this story accurate? Have I heard this story before? Have I been through this story? Has it worked out? We can begin to look at it as just that. It's a story that the brain has created in a millisecond. You didn't sit down with a cup of coffee or tea and think, okay, I need to concoct a very scary story. What could it be? No. The brain is so practiced at creating these stories, it does it without your permission, consent, or approval. Okay? It fabricates it, and it's simply a story. So, and there's only really three types of fear. There's a fear of loss, there's a fear of failure, and a fear of not being good enough. And you'll see that as you begin to analyze your fears, every single one of them will fall into at least one of those three categories. Every fear that a person has, it's either a fear of loss, it might be losing something physical, it might be losing respect, losing an opportunity, right? Losing a person, or it could be just a fear of failing. But all fears fall under the umbrella of the mother of all fears. And that is I'm fearful that I'm not good enough. I'm afraid that I don't have what it takes. And so when we begin to look at those stories, now we have an option. Now we have an option to create a different story. And that's when we get into the gift of fear. You see, fear always travels with this unseen gift. It never travels without it. It always travels with this unseen gift. And that gift, when unboxed and open, is actually fear's kryptonite, right? So we remember Superman, right? His kryptonite was the thing that made him weak, powerless. This gift of fear makes fear, it diminishes its grip over us. And what that is it's the opportunity to be courageous. Courage is the gift in fear. You see, because the only time we can feel courageous is when we are fearful. There's no other time that we can feel courageous. in order for courage to be present, there must be a fear that you are dealing with.
Wow.
And don't we love courageous people?
We absolutely do, that overcome obstacles. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, we're inspired by courageous people. When we go to a movie and we see the protagonist finally, stand up for himself or herself and move through that fear. I mean, we want to stand up and cheer. We love courageous people.
Mm-hmm.
But the only time we can be courageous is when fear is present. And so now we get to ask the most exciting thing. What is at the center of courage? And what we discover is that it's simply a different story. And we get to create that story with intention. The fear story happens automatically without our permission, consent, or approval. But the story that's at the heart of courage, that's one that we actually bring intention to. So, for instance, the firefighters who pull up to a building that's on fire, a complex that's on fire. There's going to be fear. And what's at the story? What's the story of fear? Oh my gosh, we might not be able to save these people. Oh my gosh, I might get trapped.
Or lose my own life. Right.
I'll lose my own life. Right. Or I don't think we can do this. That fear story, if that's all they focus on, they're not going to take action. But remember, it always travels with a gift, the ability to be courageous. So what they do is they intentionally remind themselves of the courageous story, which is, hey, we've trained for this. Hey, we've done this before. Mm-hmm. I know how to do it. I have a team here with me. We can do this.
That's beautiful.
Our stories matter. Our stories are powerful.
The stories that we tell ourselves, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And we all have stories that we tell ourselves, whether we realize it or not, based on our histories. So as you said that, I thought about, that courage. I would also describe that as constructive fear, the positive side of fear. So how do we distinguish between that courage or constructive fear that drives action and moves us to higher levels, and destructive fear that holds us back? How do we distinguish between those when we act?
Yeah, so really good question. So number one, we want to begin to pay attention to our emotional guidance system. So if we're in fear, if you can identify that, oh my gosh, I'm really fearful right now. I'm very scared. I'm very frightened. Ask this following question. What is it that you're afraid of?
Mm-hmm.
A fear of loss, a fear of not being good enough, a fear of failure. What is it? Once you can narrow it down, now what you've done is you've begun to interrupt the pattern of fear because you're bringing some intentional intelligence to it. Okay. So you're slowing the brain down a little bit. And you're cause you're in a state of deregulation, right? So now you're beginning to regulate the nervous system by asking a curious question. What am I afraid of? So that, number one, slows you down a little bit. Number two, now you're going to identify, I'm afraid of losing an opportunity, or I'm afraid of looking foolish. And then you ask this question. Is that story accurate? Am I really going to mess up? Am I really going to fail? Am I really going to lose their respect? You begin to ask the question, is that accurate? And if the answer is no, then you're like, oh, that was just total fear being hypervigilant.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the answer is yes. Maybe you actually are in danger. So then you want to pay attention to it, because fear, is there with an important message. And the message of fear is always, hey, pay attention. You might be in danger. Right. So I'm not saying dismiss fear altogether. Pay attention. Get curious. Is there actually a fear here? And if you determine there really isn't a fear, but I'm feeling fearful, then you get to say this. Ooh, here's an opportunity to practice. Here's an opportunity to practice being courageous.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for those strategies for embracing fear and how it impacts our goal achievement. This question, there's the statement about fearing fear itself. Why do we fear itself, and how can overcoming this fear enhance our overall resilience? Because when I think about that statement, I can't remember, it was some president who said it in a speech. I want to say Roosevelt, but I'm probably wrong. I'm thinking about how, you had a reason to be fearful in those examples that you gave, but you overcame that to push yourself forward for purposes of the experiment. But I see so many people who stop themselves before they even get to the point of an actual scenario.
Yes.
Just, again, that mindset of being afraid of being afraid.
Yes.
How do we overcome that, Fletcher?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And two things. One is, you have nothing to fear but fear itself, right? Why do we fear fear? Because it feels so unsettling. It feels so uncomfortable. Fear is not a pleasant emotion. Okay.
No.
So every emotion is simply a chemical reaction in the brain, and which is then and goes through the nervous system, right? So we understand that our emotions are chemicals, right? Oxytocin or dopamine or all that, right? Adrenaline. So fear is triggering all these chemicals that literally put you leave you in a state of unease. So that's why we fear fear. That's one of the reasons we fear it. We don't want to feel uncomfortable. Right?
Yeah.
Because it feels terrible. You feel out of control. Right? You want to run. You're right.
Right.
So you can start shaking. The whole thing is designed to put you in a state of alertness and get ready to fight or flight. So it doesn't feel good, which is why we don't want to feel fear. So, but what we do, if we can bring a sense of presence to it, we can go like, whoa. So here's what I personally do. Whoa. I'll say to myself, whoa, my body is having a reaction. So what I'm doing is now I'm separating myself from my body because I'm not my body. This machine is having a reaction of its own. I didn't tell it to. And so when I say that, whoa, my body's having a reaction, I have now created space between me and my body. And in that space, I can begin to separate and do something different. This is why, my book is called The Practice of Feeling Good. Heavy emphasis on the word practice. It's all about practicing these techniques in order to create a feel good life. But yeah, so separate yourself from the fear, and now you can begin to do something. Because as you probably know, right, when we become fearful, our higher faculties of the brain, they actually shut down. Why? Because it's channeling all your energy to get ready to fight or flight. And right, so when we can begin to interrupt that program, we can begin to reactivate some of our higher faculties and our ability to intellectualize what's actually happening.
Gotcha. And it's like you said, it's natural. It's physiology to have that fight or flight. That's how we've, managed to survive. And, our instincts from the, hair standing up on your arm, your emotional intelligence, the gut feeling, all of that helps us to survive. But we have to separate that mind from the matter of not making something be life or death just because it makes us anxious. And I think that's what we do is amplify whatever the thing is that we're facing. And I just love these strategies you're giving us from, mentally to physically, how to prepare ourselves to reverse that natural instinct, because everything is not a life or death situation, even if it feels like it, right?
Yeah. Very well said.
I know we are going to talk about your book, but I know you're a coach as well. What do you teach your clients about ways of understanding and accepting fear contributes to a more fulfilling and purposeful life?
Yeah. So a lot of people have this concept that fear is bad. We want to do everything to avoid it. And I get that. So, and it's going to continue to happen. So what we do focus on is reframing the story, because fear, all of our emotions are always reacting to some sort of primary story. So we want to become,
before you go on, I'm sorry to interrupt your thought, but the term primary story, I'm not familiar with. What does that mean?
So we have, so for me, I have this umbrella story. It's my primary story. And the primary story for me, for my life, is that life's always working out for my greatest evolution.
Mm-hmm.
That story, now I didn't say life's always working out the way I want it to work out. I said it's working out for my greatest evolution.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Okay. So because that's my story, I am way more likely to take risks because I know life's going to work out for my greatest evolution. So my tolerance for fear, my tolerance for dealing with fear may be higher than some people's because I have this overarching story. So when I begin to feel fearful, it doesn't ever, or not ever, I shouldn't say ever. It frequently doesn't reach up to these high peaks anymore because it's tempered by this story.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've done is I've reinforced this story so much in my life. I've like reprogrammed my brain with this story so that it actually, when I become fearful, it actually triggers the empowering story, the primary story that life's always working out for my greatest evolution. So I'm using this story to temper the fear. And now the fear actually triggers my overarching story. Right? So it's really about kind of, reorganizing the circuitry in the brain.
Gotcha. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great answer. Before we go, please share a synopsis of your book and tell the listeners how to acquire a copy today. Folks, you need this today. I know if you've heard what I've heard, and if you were listening, we heard the same thing. This is information we need, and we need to pass on for generations because fear is holding so many people back who don't understand that things are going to happen. They aren't always going to go your way. That's just life, whether you just sit at home and never do anything or whether you're out doing great, brave things, but things happen for you, not to you, and it's for your good. So I love that umbrella story. And mine is simply, what's the worst thing that can happen? And it's never as bad as when I look at it realistically and get my pen and paper. It's never as bad as what I've imagined.
Yes.
It really isn't. So tell us about this great book and how to get a copy.
Yeah, you bet. So the book is called The Practice of Feeling Good, how to upgrade your thinking and live a feel-good life. And the whole premise of the book is, so I've got an iPhone in my hand here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this iPhone has an operating system. And then on that, within that operating system, there's all sorts of applications, apps, right? And those little programs, those little mini programs, they all are designed to create a very specific outcome. Now, if you have an iPhone or an Android phone, we frequently get reminders that says something like, we are going to upgrade the iOS tonight. So plug it in, right? The iOS upgrade is coming. We upgrade our phones, the software, on a regular basis. And in fact, we upgrade even the physical phone itself every once in a while, don't we?
Right. Yeah.
But when's the last time any of us sat down and said, it's time to upgrade the iOS between my ears, the operating system between my ears. It's time to take a look at some of these programs and ask, do they serve me or not serve me? Do these programs hold me back or do they propel me forward? So the concept of this book is that we can upgrade our thinking. And as a result of that, it allows us to produce new and outstanding results in our health, wealth, and relationships. If we don't take the time to upgrade our thinking, to really kind of reprogram and lay down some new neural pathways, the most probable outcome is that we just continue to produce outcomes that look very much like the ones we're producing today.
Mhm.
Now, that isn't good, bad, right, or wrong. It just comes down to preference. Do you like the outcomes you're producing? If so, wonderful. Keep going.
Right.
But if you think there's more, or if there's a level of dissatisfaction, take a look and consider how to upgrade your thinking.
Amen. Amen. Very well said. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always be what you've always been. It's time to upgrade our operating systems. I am all on board. Thank
Right
you
on.
so much, Fletcher. This has been fascinating. I really appreciate your time and talent.
My pleasure. A great conversation, and thanks for all that you're doing and all the wonderful content you're putting out in the world.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for your time and support of this woman-owned indie podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and share for more like this. Until next time, be safe and be well. And wasn't that a great program? Oh, love that episode. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Learn more about me on my website, drmoanderson.com. That's MOE. You can read book excerpts, watch videos, learn about my services that I offer, and book me for a speaking engagement. I'd love to talk with your group, and I'd love to work with you. So until the next time, review, renew, and renew. Thank you.